It's a good point, and I'm glad you brought up your predictions from last time you were on the show, because one thing I'm asking a lot of people right now is, have your predictions changed? And with regards to Bitcoin, I think there's a lot of people that are maybe shifting their thoughts on altcoins and how the cycles will go from here. Not to say that altcoins won't come back or anything like that, but the timeline might be a little bit different. But with regards to Bitcoin, a lot of people are saying that their predictions haven't changed and that this really is just a bull market dip. Are you guys feeling the same?
Yeah, look, what are predictions without conviction, right? We made those predictions thinking long term about what's driving Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum, and Coinbase higher in 2025. And despite some short-term headwinds or choppiness, or whatever analogy Matt used at the beginning of this about being adrift in the macro sea, despite any of that, I believe that we're still headed to those highs by the end of 2025. And this gives an even better entry point for investors who, are with us with that conviction.
Yeah. The way I always think that during bear markets or choppy periods, the market ignores good news, but it doesn't disappear. It gets stored as dry powder for when that volatility removes. And if you think back over the last few months, boy, have we had a lot of good news. The US established a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I believe they're going to actively buy more Bitcoin before the end of this year. We found out that Abu Dhabi is buying Bitcoin. The SEC removed essentially all of its negative lawsuits against the crypto industry. People think we're going to get stablecoin and market structure regulation before the August congressional recess. It's been a clean sweep of everything we want, right? This is a market that should be already at 150K and going higher, and it just hasn't been able to because it's Liberation Day today. And that's all that people can focus on. I do think once that is removed, we will get to those all-time highs. I have a stronger conviction in our 200,000 December Bitcoin call than I did when we made it. I actually feel better about it today than I did back then because there's been so much delivery of good news in the interim.
Yes. I love it when you bring that conviction to the show. So great. It's what we need right now, because there's just like the stress and the dread on crypto Twitter is so different. And I think for you guys, we all live in an echo chamber, we live in a bubble, and you guys you're going to Dash, you're talking to institutions where there is so much bullishness right now because they're not down bad, because they haven't been here for 1-2 cycles and they're tired of this. And there's so many people that are just like quitting right now. They're just done. They're fed up with it. But I think you really, like I just keep saying it, and I can't say it enough, like just hold on, everybody. Like just hold on. Don't leave now, because if you leave now, it's possibly the worst time, because as Matt said, we've never had a setup like this before.
Despite recent market fluctuations, experts like Ryan Rasmussen from Bitwise remain optimistic about Bitcoin, forecasting an upward trajectory for Bitcoin in spite of the outlook for crypto at large. The market sentiment seems to be gearing up for a positive shift, with potential growth signals on the horizon. Welcome back, everyone, to Investocracy Crypto.
You called it the great de-risking of Bitcoin, highlighting some of the things that have happened, as you said, with regards to the strategic Bitcoin reserve and governments and sovereign wealth funds buying Bitcoin. Why do you believe? I mean, I love the statement that now is the best time to buy Bitcoin on a risk-adjusted basis. Give us the thesis for that. And actually, let me pull up an image to start you off from your recent memo.
Yes, the new Liberty Standard. I love this image so much. I wrote that memo about the first time that I really heard about Bitcoin was when it crossed $1 in February of 2011. And I mentioned in the memo that I ran a meeting, and at the end of that meeting, we had done a discussion on Bitcoin. I could have gone out and bought $1,000 of Bitcoin. I'd have $88 million today. And instead, I left the office and got a cup of coffee, which is a true story. It's a very expensive cup of coffee. But then I use this as an example because let's say I had decided to buy $1,000 of Bitcoin. The largest exchange in crypto at the time was New Liberty Standard. And this is its terms of service. You can buy Bitcoins by sending a PayPal payment to this address. I try to process it in 48 hours. This is a personal hobby. Everything on this site is legal as far as I know. So like, like, it's easy to say today, I should have gone and bought $1,000 of Bitcoin. But at the time, it meant sending $1,000 to a random dude who said it maybe is legal what I'm doing. Like, there was just so much risk. And if you think about, that's been true throughout crypto's history. We had trading risk. Then we had custody risk. Where would I have custodied my crypto? Probably at Mt. Gox. Like, oh, that didn't turn out so well, right? And then we had regulatory risk. And then there was the risk of, would institutions adopt it? And, would we ever get an ETF? There were just so many risks in crypto all along the way that from a risk adjusted basis, like, of course, from an absolute basis, I should have gone out and bought Bitcoin when it was $1. But adjusting for all the risk, the trading risk, the custody risk, the regulatory risk, etc., it was a terrible investment. That's why I didn't do it. You shouldn't feel bad if you didn't do it as well. The point I was making to get to this idea that this is the best risk-adjusted moment to buy Bitcoin is history, is we've removed all of the existential risks. The last existential risk, the one that I was still worried about as recently as 6 months ago, was that the US government would ban it. That one day the US government would feel the dollar was threatened by Bitcoin and it would ban it the way it effectively banned the private ownership of gold in the 1930s. And that was still a major risk. Like, your investment could go down a lot if that happened. But now we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now it's in the US's interest to support Bitcoin. So we've removed all of the existential risks from Bitcoin. And yet we still have a 10x to go before we match gold. And I think Bitcoin will ultimately be much more than gold. So there's still 10, 20x more upside and very little of this existential risk on the downside. There's no risk that Bitcoin is going to zero. It's like an incredible setup. That's why I've been so excited to be on the road and sort of help people realize this. It's the best moment in history to buy Bitcoin from where I sit.
Ryan Rasmussen's insights shed light on the unique dynamics at play in the market. Despite initial setbacks due to tariffs, Bitcoin has shown resilience, outperforming traditional assets like gold and the S&P 500. The correlation between Bitcoin's performance and global events highlights its significance in the financial world.
As the US and different governments start to buy Bitcoin, there's this moment of, are we accepting that Bitcoin is going to be a new global reserve currency? And does that push the US dollar away from being the global reserve currency? And is that a risk for the US in the long term? How do you think about that? And then I also want to touch on like Bitcoin versus gold and that correlation, which does not seem to be correlating right now as gold continues to go up. Although actually I shouldn't say that. Matt, you pointed out that gold, that it is up since the election.
Yeah, I can take one more stab at this. This is a topic I care about deeply, and then I promise, Ryan, I'll shut up.
Keep going. I'm over here buying Bitcoin while you're talking, so we're good.
No, you're buying GameStop. Don't lie.
That's right. That's right.
We'll get to that in a sec.
We'll get to that. Here's the thing that I really care about this. So Cliff Asness, who runs AQR, an incredible investor, incredible hedge fund investor, wrote a letter after the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve was announced and said that this is akin to the US establishing a Chinese yuan reserve, right? Promoting something to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And that's actually precisely wrong. I'm a strong proponent of the US dollar being the world's reserve currency. I know we'll talk about how stablecoins can extend the period of time that the US dollar can serve as the world's reserve currency. It's good for America, which is a country that I live in. But we have to accept that there is a possible world in the future where we cede sole ownership of being the world's reserve currency. It's happened to every world reserve currency in the past. We have highly, accelerating debt and deficits. It could happen to the US in the future. And if it does, what do we want to happen? Do we want it to go to a non-political currency like Bitcoin, or do we want to go to a currency of one of our enemies, right? Or another foreign government? And all the strategic Bitcoin reserve does is it tilts that alternate stream that says, if the world wants to move off the dollar as the sole reserve asset, maybe the future will be dollar and then apolitical Bitcoin. And that's a lot better future for the US than going from dollar to Chinese yuan, which is the other option. So we can't ignore the possibility that this might happen in the future. And I think it's very forward thinking to sort of aim the flow of where we end up to something that's at least neutral, which is what Bitcoin is.
The shift towards digital assets as growth assets signifies a new era in investing, where the landscape is ever-changing. With Bitcoin leading the charge as a store of value, the future looks promising. Rasmussen's perspective on the wider market underscores the importance of established projects versus emerging ones in times of uncertainty. But before going any further, if you made it this far into the video, thank you. These videos take a lot of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed them, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This goes a long way in helping us grow. That said, back to the video.
I think we're just at the beginning of seeing non-crypto industry corporations purchasing Bitcoin as a treasury asset. So GameStop just announced that they raised $1.5 billion to purchase Bitcoin. And I think what people don't understand is that's going to make them the fourth largest, as you have on the screen here, the fourth largest holder of Bitcoin among public companies. So they're automatically jumping past a ton of Bitcoin miners, a ton of other companies like Metaplanet and others who have adopted this Bitcoin standard in recent months with one purchase. Now, GameStop, of course, is a bit of a unique equity, a bit of a unique investment because it's lived in this realm of Wall Street bets and meme stocks now for a couple of years. But I think this is a broader signal of investors, or rather executives at companies, recognizing that investors will reward companies who invest in Bitcoin. We've seen it happen with MicroStrategy, which went from a relatively small technology stock to now be included in the NASDAQ 100 following its immense Bitcoin buy. So I think this is more of a signal of what's to come. And there's a really nuanced kind of accounting rule that changed the beginning of 2025, where it made it a lot less risky. Talking about the de-risking of Bitcoin, this is one of those elements that de-risks Bitcoin as an investment for corporations. And that rule essentially said that before 2025, companies that invested in Bitcoin could only recognize a change in value when they wrote down the value of Bitcoin if the price fell. They weren't able to get a benefit in their earnings if the price of Bitcoin rose. So it was a huge risk move from an earnings perspective, or from signaling to the market what's happening with the company's growth and earnings if they purchased Bitcoin. But now, at the beginning of this year, that rule changed, and now companies can get the benefit of Bitcoin appreciation on their balance sheet reflected in their earnings. And I think that's a huge thing that's going to transform the market. We had 70 plus companies buying Bitcoin before that rule change went into effect. They were buying Bitcoin when, in the best case scenario, the investment would stay flat, and in a worst case scenario, the investment would fall and they would have to take a huge hit to their earnings. That's no longer the case. And I think we're starting to see more non-crypto companies recognize the benefit they can get from investing in Bitcoin as a treasury asset. I think the US investing in Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset certainly de-risks a corporation doing that and looking dumb or coming off to investors like they don't know what they're doing. Say, look, the US government is doing this. Some of the best investors out there, Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, you have David Sachs, they're looking to bring Bitcoin into the US government. Why shouldn't we be doing that as a corporation when we can get a benefit to our stock price? So I think a lot more companies are going to buy Bitcoin this year, and GameStop's more the beginning of the trend that, again, the people that are catching the falling knife here.
In conclusion, the potential for growth in Bitcoin amidst market uncertainties presents a compelling opportunity for investors. With experts forecasting a positive trajectory and the resilience of digital assets shining through, now might be the time to consider diving into this volatile yet rewarding market. But what do you think? Share your thoughts down below. And finally, if you would like to know more about cryptocurrencies, or specifically Bitcoin, go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. See you there.